Section 9, window lights, applying strips and leads. The 4 remaining light strips that you got are all the same length and they're full pads, very similar to what you see here. And the blue jig, this is the window light jig, which allows you to slip in and put your snacks in and treats and everything. It's molded to form fairly seamlessly to the top of the inside of the TARDIS. So you're going to want to peel the backing and apply the sign light strips. You notice there's a ridge that's in the middle of that recessed area. One sign light strip will hug that ridge, right bump against it on the going around. You start at a full pad at one edge here and wrap it and peel the backing and wrap it all the way around until you get back to this side. If it's a little bit long, you can cut it off or you can try to work with it as is there. But cutting it off, you lose a little bit of lighting at the end, which is okay. It's all diffused inside the box. The next sign strip you're going to want to do above or below, again, is just hugging that center ridge. So they're nice and parallel and taking and almost no gap between the ridge and the strip. When you do the other 2 strips, you want them right up against, right adjacent to the first strips. Not overlapping, but adjacent so they still fit within that depressed area. And they'll wrap all the way around. You'll get strips that look like they've been soldered by me. They have not. They have been soldered at the manufacturing as part of their process. I did ask about it. They said, yeah, we just do them, and we just do it manually, solder it each time as we do the long strips. And so they all come with some of these already pre-soldered segments. The adhesive on the back goes across that backing, so no worries about it falling apart. Just be gentle with them at that port. So you've applied the sign light strips. You've pressed them down onto the model here, and it goes all the way around. You just want to bridge that gap there for the where you have the opening there where it goes around a corner but no plastic to sit on. You just want to make adhere it so it's a nice smooth bend. So we're back here to this corner, and the next thing you'll notice is the 2 strips that are adjacent on the top and on the bottom. The adjacent portion has the negative or the positive sides of the strips adjacent to each other. That is intentional so that you can solder bridge this portion at the end in between them and make a couple connections, and which eliminates several of the jumper wires that you're going to need for the rest of the process here to get it wired up. So again, the strips that are fully adjacent to each other, you want the same polarities side by side. The next step is going to be tinning. You can just tin all of the pads on both of the ends, and that'll give you flexibility to figure out the jumpers. So I'm going to start with that step, and I'm going to tin all those pads before moving on. As you see, I've tinned all of the pads on both sides. If you damage a little bit of the plastic, no worries, because it's going to be unseen and it shouldn't interfere with the function. So don't worry if it's melted a little bit, like right there on that ridge and some of these portions. You're probably going to melt or damage a little bit more when you solder the jumpers and leads onto the pads. As well as don't worry about if some of the ends, if you do all the ends lined up on one side, they may not come all the way out to the ends on the other side, and that's perfectly fine. Again, it's not going to take up so much distance. It's going to be noticed once the window panels are on and it lit from the inside. So the next step is going to be doing the solder bridges for the adjacent pads. I'm going to get extra solder on the tip, and I'm going to try to heat up both of the adjacent pads at the same time, and then add more solder from the wire. It won't want to take initially because of that gap. I mean, it's intended not to be able to bridge them, but just a little bit of wonking around there. And you see now we've got a bridge across those 2. And we're going to do the same for the negatives on this side. Heat up both pads with the iron, feed a bunch of solder in there, and it's bridged. And let me see if I can zoom in on that and you can take a look at what it looks like. So you see the bridging on those Jason pads. And there will be a little more bridging on this one once we get the leads on there. In fact, I might as well go ahead and try to make it look a little more bridged at the moment. Feed it a little more solder in there. Yeah, that's good enough. That'll definitely hold. So here comes the fun part, maybe kind of considered the trickiest part of the build. You're going to want to take your scrap wires from previous portions that we've cut off and use them, strip them about 1/4 inch, 1/8 to 1/4 inch, closer to 1/4 inch. We're going to provide them as jumpers so we can apply one end as a jumper from the bridge portion of a pad. Here it happens to be negative. And we're going to apply that to both the pads, negative pads down here on the opposite portion. It can be on this side or it can be to the negative on the other side. The point is, it doesn't matter which side it goes to. They will power fine regardless. And we need to make sure that all of the grounds are connected. So these two grounds are connected, and then we're going to apply a jumper from here down to here on this negative pad, and we can do a jumper from this pad to this pad, or just two jumpers from here, one to each pad of the negative side down here. Or again, if you want to do it to the opposite side. We do want to keep it kind of tight in there because when this whole jig slips into the box, the outer corners, where the outer corners of this portion would be, we need to keep it kind of within the confines of that. So kind of low profile. I've already prepared for one side my one jumper that's going to go from this bridged negative down to the bottom negative down here instead of crossing the gap over to the other side. And this is probably going to be a bit tricky to do on camera, but bear with me. There's already a lot of solder on that bridge pad, so this should not take much effort. You just want to get that lead just heated up, settled in there, pressed in, and then removed. And then I'm going to have to rotate this so I can see what I'm doing. Might be better to use fingers and a little more solder and press it down in there. Again, careful not to damage the cob strip. If you damage a little bit of the plastic, that's okay. There we go. Let's get that zoomed in for that first one and see how it looks. That is not bad. So we've made the connection from the two grounds up here are connected. We made that connection down to this ground strip. And next we're going to apply another jumper to hit this ground strip right there. And I'm going to zoom out because it's going to go wonky as heck if I don't. I've prepared another shorter jumper here that should be sized about right to make that next bridge. I'm going to go from that one same point. Hopefully the rest doesn't come undone. Take it away and then let go. This portion I can't add a little more solder here. I've already prepped the pads, tinned the pads, so this should go a little smoother. A little bit of heat, let go, and there we go. Let's zoom in on that little guy. There we go. So we've got the bridge going from these two bridge pads. The jumper's going to this negative and this negative down here. Next, we're going to set up and do the positive jumpers. I've rotated this around. I'm going to do the positive jumpers, 5-volt jumpers, to this other's opposite side, just so I still have a little more clearance and room to play with, and there's less chance of shorting something out. Again, the center adjacent pads have been bridged on the other side, but I might apply some bridging here too, just because. Again, it gives me a little more flexibility. It also gives me some more surface that's bridged to actually apply the jumpers to. So heat that all up, get extra solder in there, and that's bridged. And I only need to do that positive 5 volts because that's the one I'm working with on this side. I've already prepped a jumper that I'm going to try to do as well as I did the first one. So here we go. It's already stripped and tinned And I've got a lot of solder on this bridge already, so I'm just going to press it all together, melt it in, hold it in place, hopefully. Now I can see it's cooled, and I will see how the jumper runs to the other one. Oh, those did get splayed quite a bit, didn't they? This is a thicker wire, so even if it's a shorter strip, it should still hold fine. It looks like I'm going to have to press it out a little bit to get it to reach that jumper at on the other side. I'm just going to use my fingers. My camera might get blurry, but I think I'm going to have the best chance of getting this right the first time, holding it with my hands. There we go. It's not on the pad, it's adjacent to it, but I feel like it's gonna fit well. And next we've got one more short jumper to apply. I'm going to do the same thing as I did on the other side. In my case, I'm going to apply it from this bridged pad to this pad right over here. Just because this other one looks kind of wonky. It'll work, but it looks kind of wonky, so I don't want to mess with it too much. I think the other one has a better chance of holding in there. In fact, I might get a little fresh solder on that tip. Okay, here we go. Wish me luck. Ah, of course, one came out. Okay, and now they both came out. Okay, I'm going to start this one from scratch. I think I might fix this off camera so you don't suffer too much with me. There's only reason for one of us to suffer through this. Yeah, okay, I'm going to do this off camera. I finally got that little sucker bridged on there well enough. I think I'll use a different tool to hold this in place for doing this last pad. Add some more solder to the tip. Hold in place a second and let go. All right, that looks good enough. It's not rising up too much from the surface, from that plane. Neither of them are. And it looks like they're all connected. I've got the positive 5 volts on this row, these two rows bridge, and I've got jumpers going to 5 volts on each of the other 2 strips, as well as having the black jumpers. I've got the blacks bridged, negatives bridged on these 2 strips, and then jumpers from that bridge to each of the grounds or negatives on the 2 strips below. So now I'm going to do a quick read up on the guide and make sure this is kind of in an order, and I'm going to apply power as I test to make sure applying power to one of the 5 volts and one of the ground points illuminates all of the strips, which is the goal. I've adjusted the setup here so I can hopefully be able to bridge these guys or use the contacts and test fire this light strip. I'm going to turn on the battery box down here that we had from the earlier on in the build, and I've got a couple DuPont jumpers going to from the battery box up here, so it's a little easier to do on camera. I'm going to apply the negative jumper to a negative bridge and a positive jumper to a positive. And as you see, just contacting 2 points, all of the light strips light up now. They're wired in parallel. We do need them wired in parallel, otherwise you will experience a decline in the brightness from one strip to the next, to the next, to the next. Wired in parallel now, we just need the same voltage. All the strips are getting the same voltage, thus the same illumination. So those jumpers have done their job, and the last test is not the last test. The next step is going to be applying the long leads to 2 of the pads here so we can run that power from the bottom of the box once this is inserted. So here we have the 2 long leads from the kit, 2 long pre-pinned leads. I've cut them to 15 inches as per the guide, and I've stripped a 1/4 inch from the bare ends, and I've already twisted, fluxed, and tinned both those ends. I'm going to work with the negative lead first and try to hit one of the pads, one of the negative pads that will not cause all the others to come undone. Which turns out to be a slight bit of a challenge at this point. I'm going to go for right in there for this this one pad that has 1 jumper on it. It looks like it might be an easier easier victim to hit with this jumper without dislodging everything. Just melt a little bit, take it away while holding the wire for a moment, and it looks like they've both stayed in place. I think that jumper slipped out a little bit, but we'll find out after I do the testing, or when I do the testing after this step. And now I'm going to rotate it and do the positive, get that black lead out of the way, and now I'm going to do the positive side. Which positive? I think I'm going to go for that same mound where where the bridge and the other jumpers are at. This is probably going to be risky as well. It's all a risky job at this point. But like I said, I would consider this to be the most challenging. You know what? I'm gonna go for this other single pad with a single jumper like I did the other one. After all, I just wussed out on camera. And hold it in place for a second. And there. Now we've already established that all the positives and grounds are connected between the 4 strips, and I just needed to connect the lead to 1 ground and 1 positive. And now we're going to go back and power test this one more time before we move to the insertion in the build. I've set up the area again to do this last test. Again, testing each step of the way ensures that we don't have a big oh crap later on, especially after things are assembled in the build. So I've got the jumpers, the leads, the 2 ground and power leads are already attached to the jig, and everything's connected to the battery box. And just turning that on, now we know we've got good function all around. Actually, it looks pretty good, if I do say so myself. As the last step in this process, mentioned in the guide, I did apply hot glue to the jumpers to hold them in place, as well as to the 2 leads that come off of this. Generally, I want them to come out, stick out a little bit, but as long as they're hot glued towards on the pad side in this corner area, then I'm not concerned about the welds coming loose. The leads are going to be coming out into that cutout channel at the corner of the TARDIS once we slide it in. I've also applied the red heat shrink to the end of the pins to be able to slide it through the box.